some of our colleagues coming from one of the hotels that bus broke down, but I think many of them should be on their way shortly, but we should be starting up anyway. So could everyone on the TV panel please make your way up? You know who you are, so I think this should be easy. Introduce you there. Come on, James. You need a special invite, of course. Please, everyone, clap for Dr. James Wood. Yay.
Good morning. I'm Hemal Ganguly and co-chairing it with Vivek Kapoor, one of the major architects of One Health, particularly in the area which we are dealing today in tuberculosis. We know that there is a very important effort in the One Health to really bring in certain intervention which will make a difference. And although the One Health is a part of the major SDG thrust, it has been very difficult to really bring together the human health and animal health, although several times when we were struck by H5N1 and many other outbreaks, we came together to solve the problem. But this is the first time I saw that something is happening. India is a very big disease burdened country for tuberculosis, and to our dismay we found that one of the contributors was also the tuberculosis in the cattle. The cattle suffer from both bovine tuberculosis as well as they are also infected by human tuberculosis organisms. The space between human and animals and cattle in India is shrinking very fast. Sometimes they live in a very close conjunction with each other. And culturally, it is very, very difficult to handle it in a way it has been handled in other countries. So we have in our panelist a very important person from Ethiopia. We in India and the people in South Africa handle this situation differently. Like in India, the culling of the cattle will be an angina. So somewhere some preventive and other efforts have to be made. In South Africa, when the lions get bovine tuberculosis, they don't do anything. It is a natural cycle. In the same way, in Africa, it is a very strong economic reason to deal with this particular situation. So Vivek, when he came here and the DBT got together a group of people to see what we can do, it was a very overall proposal which included surveillance, which included using BCG vaccine through the experience in the cattle, which also included in improving the device which is used as a diagnostics, and also creating a new skin test which was not exactly as it was done in human to tuberculosis. So entire complete package through science and technology was developed, but at this given moment it will be more a community effort than anything else, because it has a very important social and cultural connotation, and it also has a formidable problem when actually we get some results which are positive, to expand it, upscale it, and ultimately monitor the effort where the new tools of epidemiology may have to be used. With this introduction, I will invite Dr. James Wood to give his keynote address. He is from the University of Cambridge and actually packs in a lot of experiences in infectious disease modeling, in putting genomic data along with the infectious disease intervention. Doctor, you are invited.
Good morning, and I'd like to thank the Chair for the excellent introduction to my talk. In fact, the Chair has made all of the points that I wanted to make, so I should probably just sit down now. But I won't, and I'll try and reiterate some of the points that the Chair has just made in that important introduction to this important disease. Before I start, I must say it's a great pleasure to be standing here, and I'd like to thank the organisers and the sponsors for giving me the opportunity to make this presentation. And the first time I visited this fantastic country, which was, it turns out, 35 years ago, I spent a month as a guest of the NDDB, seeing the veterinary services and seeing many of the things that were delivered through that amazing cooperative programme. I never imagined that I would be back here 35 years later, standing in front of you. So I'd like to thank everyone for the privilege of that. As you just heard, I'm going to be trying to give you an overview of bovine tuberculosis and its zoonotic aspects, focusing in particular on low and middle income countries, but trying to take a historical perspective to understand both the strengths of the data that we have and also some of the weaknesses, and looking at the opportunities for control that exist. So bovine tuberculosis is really very similar to human tuberculosis in humans. The organism itself is part of the MTB complex, and it has evolved from Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the major but not sole cause of TB in humans, by the loss of genetic material, by the loss of genes. I show a cartoon of how different members of the complex have evolved over time from MTB, from a review paper of Steve Gordon's. But this infection in cattle will cause granulomatous lung disease, and I'll show you a post-mortem specimen here. I'm sorry, it's just after breakfast, but it's but this is an extent of the seriousness of this infection in cattle. This disease has received attention in relation to control for more than 100 years now. And the interest in bovine TB came from our interest in human TB. And so the control of bovine TB has, to a great extent, always been driven by our desire to control disease in humans. Bovine TB has been a significant public health issue pretty much wherever investigated. And interestingly, M. bovis infection, wherever investigated 100 years ago, was particularly associated with extrapulmonary disease. So even though you get a pulmonary infection very commonly in cattle, in humans often you will get scrofula or rather ill-defined abdominal disease, which can be particularly hard to diagnose in a routine manner, particularly in children. The realization that bovine TB was important for disease in humans drove the early control program, but also drove the program of milk pasteurization, which can be a very effective way of cleaning milk before it's drunk. But it doesn't in itself control the important disease in cattle. So just thinking about the control, which was successful in the USA and still is a success in the USA, there was a massive cost to the control program over a 20 or 30 year program. And when this program in the US started, there was around 10% of all dairy cows that were infected. Millions of tests, millions of cows were culled as part of a very aggressive program. But this was successful. but it was driven with great political will in a culture where such a control program was acceptable. I want to contrast what's happened in the UK. So we started pasteurising our milk in the 1920s, and actually, even just in the UK, by the end of the Second World War, we would have saved tens of thousands of lives, particularly of children who were dying frequently from drinking contaminated milk. We started to control the disease in cattle 10 or so years later, and it was 20 or 30 years before we started having a mandatory control program. And within 10 years, the clinical disease had more or less disappeared in cattle. And with 10 years after that, there was only a very small amount of disease left in the country. As a result of the authorities thinking the battle was won, controls were relaxed, and this was disastrous. So if you look at this graph here, you can see the success in the early stages around the 1950s, when we were testing every cow on an annual basis. Every herd was visited every year and formally tested. This led to a very low incidence in the 1970s and through to the 1980s, where controls were relaxed. And before anyone realised, the incidence started to decline quite rapidly. But despite the fact that we were testing on an infrequent basis and also conducting slaughterhouse surveillance in order to identify infected herds, it was clear with hindsight that the control was still relatively successful, because when we stopped testing for 6 to 9 months during a major foot-and-mouth disease outbreak, where we were concerned about testing bringing infection onto the farm, foot-and-mouth disease infection onto the farm, the incidence doubled or trebled. It absolutely exploded across the country, and that is a reflection of just how successful the controls are. Now, unfortunately, when we started retesting again, the infection has never reduced back to pre-2001 levels. Although perhaps in the last 2 or 3 years we're bringing the infection under control. But one of the major problems that we have in the UK is we have a second animal host. And this infection, in parts of the UK where this second animal host is not important, in Scotland, we are officially TB free. And so this is where our test and slaughter policy can work very effectively, where there is just one host. However, in the southwest of England, where the badger is a significant amplifying host, where the infection can spread between badgers and also from badgers to cattle, but also very importantly, it spreads from cattle to badgers. So cattle, once if you move infected cows to a new area, they can infect other cattle, and then those cows can then infect badger social groups. We know that around 50% of all infections are originally derived through badgers. So this is a real complication, which is meaning that we are not yet bringing the disease rapidly under control. But as I said earlier, our test and slaughter program is suppressing it, and so controlling the numbers so they're not increasing. But that, of course, is not enough. When we are killing 30,000 cows every year in order this infection, it's costing the UK around £100 million every year to control this infection. So that is enough of a historical perspective. Thinking about BTB in low and middle income countries. The infection is widespread in many countries, but prevalence is very variable. It is clear that management in LMIC, just as you would expect, is a major determinant of infection. Trade, particularly trade in cross-fed cattle, which are brought in order to improve milking, appear to be particularly susceptible, and that trade can spread the infection very well. And I'll show you some data demonstrating in Ethiopia how larger herd sizes are a major driver of high prevalence of infection. In some countries, you get multiple infections common. So there's multiple sources of infection, multiple routes of infection onto infected dairy herds. Often more lower density traditional forms of farming result in a much lower herd prevalence. And so this is just an indication of how important management factors are in promoting the spread of this infection in cattle. And I think because of the absence of compensation and because of, in countries such as your own, and you don't need me to tell you that, but just to re-emphasise how impossible it is to consider a test and slaughter programme in countries where that is unacceptable in societal terms. We need other alternative approaches to control other than test and slaughter. But at the moment there are no vaccines licensed and no sensible therapeutics that we can use in order to deal with this infection. So one of the great concerns as we move forward in low and middle income countries where milk is a very important source of food, and in order to improve milk production we are intensifying the way that we farm dairy cattle. In Ethiopia there is a major risk that this intensification is going to drive further prevalence. And I will show you some specific figures from different regions of Ethiopia. But it's clear that with more than 50% of dairy herds around Addis Ababa in the Central Highlands being infected, and many animals being traded from that central region, there is a real risk of transmission around the country. And on this slide I want to show you just how important herd size and intensification is in driving infection. You can see that as animals get older, all of these 4 graphs representing 4 different groupings of herd size represent the rates in very young animals through to much older animals on the right as you go across the axis. You can see that in the top left-hand graph of the smallest herd sizes, typically the smallholders or the people who are farming as part of their subsistence rather than just their sole business. There's very little increase of the prevalence of disease in Ethiopia with age of cattle. And as you get into larger herds from 8 to 20, the green line starts to go up, and in 21 to 55 into medium-sized herds, you can see there's a substantial increase in the prevalence of disease with age. And transmission rates are higher still in the largest herd sizes of going up above 100. And that is very clear evidence of the importance of herd size, and it's also something that we see it's not something unique to Ethiopia where there are no formal controls, but it's something also that we see in the UK in the presence of stringent control programs. So herd size, the number of animals you keep, the number of cattle you keep together, which is necessary if you're intensifying production, improving production, is a major driver of infection. And so this slide just shows you the massive extent of variation of infection prevalence in different countries, different low and middle income countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And I draw your attention really to the figures from Ethiopia and also then I want to come on to India. So around Addis Ababa, around a third of all cattle, more than 50% of all herds themselves are infected. Whereas if you move up into the north, further north into Gondar, then despite the animals being kept in relatively similar manners, the infection prevalence is down at 1%, with only about 1 in 5 herds being infected. And so you can see there's real regional heterogeneities just within one country. I'll show you some of the heterogeneities from Three's important paper from last year. But India overall has an infection prevalence estimated to be between 5 and 10%. And one of the reasons that I think the infection is so important here in India, and again I feel embarrassed to be telling you about your own country, but there's such a large cattle population that with a proportion of dairy cattle infected of 7%, that means that you have many tens of millions of cattle that are infected with bovine TB at any one time. And because of the close way, as was referred to in the excellent introduction, in which many people will live with their cows, there's a real risk of transmission of infection between cattle and humans. And this is where I think India is not unique, but is a special case in relation to the importance of bovine TB control. As was introduced already, I'll pass quickly over this. India has the major global burden of TB disease in humans. And when you combine that with the largest cattle population in the world, that makes for a really important justification for disease control, which is why it's so good to see such an important strategic plan for tuberculosis elimination being driven forward here in India. And referring to Sri's excellent meta-analysis of all of the data available in recent years in India, coming up with this prevalence, average prevalence of 7%. But again, I would emphasize the regional heterogeneities here. In terms of significance of disease, I think there's one figure that for me stands out importantly, with an estimation of over 20 million cattle being infected at any one time. That's twice as many cows that exist in the whole of the US dairy industry. This is a major, major issue here that merits the attention that it's receiving this session and in the disease control program. And that is why it's centrally important in terms of the zoonotic transmission of this infection that we follow the roadmap for zoonotic tuberculosis, which was co-produced by the WHO, OHIC, and other international agencies. So where are we with the diagnosis of this infection? Well, the frustration for me is that we are still using methods that were central to our control efforts 100 years ago. But there are opportunities for us to do this better. So culture is very important in terms of characterizing infection, but we are still using the comparative skin test as our major bedrock of control. And we know that the comparative skin test, essentially in countries where there's a lot of co-infection with environmental microbacteria, has a sensitivity which may be as low as 50% in the UK, where we've tried to carefully estimate it. Of course, in contrast, in a high incidence area, such as the southwest of England or perhaps here in India, the positive predictive value of a positive test is very high. So if you find a positive, then that has a very high probability in a high incidence area of being correct. But that doesn't mean to say that the test is not missing a substantial burden of disease. We must do better than this. We of course now, although it's expensive, have the gamma interferon assay as well. And the test developed in cattle actually has led to a new test in humans as well. It's not always just the veterinary sector benefiting from the medical sector. This is an example of progress being driven from the animal sector here. I think it's very exciting. The gamma interferon are now increasing the skin test based on defined antigens, which can both improve our ability to diagnose this infection in a predictable manner, but also potentially differentiate from BCG vaccination, of which I'll say a little bit more. I think it's a very exciting and important advance that's being driven by the work between APHA in the UK and Professor Kapula's group in Penn State, and all of these massive regional heterogeneities. So let me finish off by thinking about what are the opportunities. We must look in every region where we want to control to find out what the actual infections are, and these vary widely. In many cases, MTB will be the major infection in cattle, as you've demonstrated from your work here in India and parts of India, but in other places it will be M. bovis. In other places it will be other members of the MTB complex. We must have DIVA tests and start using defined DIVA tests, which those of you who saw the poster from Dowie demonstrating how poorly controlled PPD antigen availability around the world is, we'll see that defined protein antigens are much, much preferable to using the traditional tuberculin approach. But there needs to be regulatory change to accept that. I'm very excited by our work with Vivek here in India, but also in Ethiopia, looking at measuring the impact of BCG vaccination on transmission in cattle. And I think the new data that will come from these Gates-funded projects may transform our ability to control this infection where there is no test and slaughter policy or ability. I think there are really exciting advances, and we need then to understand how BCG may work where you have infections other than N-bovis in cattle and in humans. The key point is that test and slaughter, in the absence of massive, in the absence of societal acceptance and massive cash injections, will not work. The tests that we have now are not good enough, but we can improve. And we need to look at how the tests work in every endemic setting. We cannot just extrapolate all the time. Another major issue with testing-based programs is what you do with your positive cattle when there are no controls. So the great opportunity is using vaccination, but we must act now before intensification, as in Ethiopia, makes things worse and worse. And that's true whether we're talking about the situation in sub-Saharan Africa or here in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Next up is Dr. Kumanan. Dr. Kumanan is from Tanabas. He's a professor.
Good morning and salutations to the August gathering here. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm just going to say something about bovine tuberculosis in India, way forward. So we all know that it's a very chronic disease and endemic in India. Prevalence says like 1% to 51.2%. Some of the claims are very tall. Probably they have been reporting from small herds. Probably that could be the reason for the higher side of the incidence. And again, we all know that it has direct and indirect economic losses by way of milk yield and then weight loss. Another important thing is the reproductive performance. Like it has been estimated globally, we are lost to the tune of about $3 billion US. And the important thing is like its zoonotic importance, preferably in case of animal handlers, consumption of unpasteurized milk, which is very common under our conditions. And again, the slaughterhouse workers, without knowing what they are handling, they are highly under the risk zone. Again, bovine TB control is very, very important for the control of the human TB. And as of now, the diagnosis is basically on the in vivo intradermal skin test and the in vitro interferon gamma release assay. So what is the need of the day? Like systematic surveillance, this has to be in a two-pronged attack, ante-mortem as well as the slaughterhouse diagnosis. We all know that skin test and the IGRA are the two things that are being used, with the skin test being the most common one and easy to perform. With regard to skin test, it lacks some of the defined components and quality control of the PPDs which we use in the skin test. That's one issue which we need to resolve. And again, IGRA is always considered to be a kind of sensitive test, but it will be very difficult to handle all these samples by IGRA because of sampling transport and then requiring laboratory facilities. So in this scenario, they need to develop a fit for purpose bovine TB diagnostic assay, which to also help us in taking care of the viva situations, which is again the need of the day in our country. The other issue is reducing the burden of bovine TB is definitely going to help us in controlling or reducing the burden of TB in case of human beings. We should keep that also in mind. And as of now, we do not have a potent vaccine for use in animals. Strategies and policies, the most important thing which we require in the Indian context. And especially with regard to the reactors. Like that's going to be a big issue or big challenge for us. What are the possible approaches we have? So continuous surveillance. As of now, we are not having a very serious screening procedures or surveillance procedures. So this has to be in place, and that's very important. Everybody should consider that as the first and foremost thing which is required in our conditions. And then once when we do the continuous surveillance, we should keep in mind that we need to have a very standard quality reagents for testing. And we have the PPD. PPD has some issues, though we use it presently, because of the undefined nature of the constituents or the composition of the PPD. So that has to be resolved. And again, validation of the diagnostic present methods is again another thing we should keep in mind. So to overcome that, we can think of designing and validation of new recombinant antigen-based or peptide-based fit-for-purpose test. When we say fit-for-purpose test, then we should keep in mind of differentiating the vaccinated from the infected ones. So that's going to be the foremost thing. And again, in countries like ours, there are a lot of environmental mycobacteria which could cross-react with the existing diagnostic tests that we are employing. So that's why that we need to keep thinking about developing better reagents for quick and accurate diagnosis of bovine TB, and defined culling policies. Once when we have diagnosed about the disease, what we are going to do with these animals, like that's going to be again a big challenge. Definitely we need to have a strong policy. We cannot advocate slaughter policies in our country. So what are we going to do? We should think of like goshalas or like some places to keep these animals and some policies to do that also. And again, once when we solve that, then we can think of the future vaccines. Probably BCG could be an answer to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sumanan. Thanks for keeping us in time. Next up is Dr. Umesh Alvadi, and he's from the USAID.
Thank you to the organizers, Dr. Ganguly, Dr. Vivek Kapoor, for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to present here. In the next 5 minutes, I'll be covering TB as a public health challenge with a human health perspective. So as Dr. James Wood also said that TB is a recognized major public health challenge for the human health. It's a leading cause of death from a single infectious agent. In 2017, there were approximately 10 million incident new cases of TB worldwide, and out of them about 558,000 were from MDR-TB. MDR-TB is a form of TB in which the bacilli is resistant to two important anti-TB drugs, isoniazid and rifampicin. India is the highest TB burden country, contributing about 27% of the global burden of TB and 24% of the global burden of the drug-resistant TB. In 2017, there were approximately estimated 2.7 million incident TB cases and 135,000 of MDR cases. So what are the key gaps here? As far as in TB control program, the key gaps are we are missing cases. Not all cases with TB are detected. Not all cases of TB which are detected are put on treatment. Not all cases of TB which are put on treatment are successfully treated. And drug resistance TB itself is a significant challenge. So let's look at the drug resistance TB scenario in the country. So there is estimated 125,000 MDR TB cases in the country. Out of them are 65,000 among notified pulmonary TB cases. Last year we have detected about 39,000 MDR TB cases, and out of them about 36,000 cases were put on treatment. And if we apply the current treatment success rate of MDR TB cases, which is close to 46%, we can say that about 17,000 out of estimated 135,000 MDR TB cases is going to be successfully cured or treated. So these are the challenges which we are seeing here. Now, there are various key barriers for the TB control program. So I just covered shortly stigma. Stigma is one of the barriers for access to care, diagnosis as well as treatment and completing treatment. Then delayed access to the standard of care, the standard diagnosis and standard treatment. There are studies which quotes that the patient has to follow, usually goes to the multiple private provider before the actual TB test with a good sensitivity and specificity is offered and a standard of treatment is provided to the patient. The other barrier is the point of care diagnosis with drug susceptibility testing. Usually the TB testing is a cascade of testing. First we diagnose TB, then we go for the refractory resistance TB, then we go for the other drug resistance, which takes a time and increase the turnaround time of diagnosis as well as putting patient on treatment. Thus the chain of infection is there. Then the drug resistance itself is a challenge, and we have very limited drugs available for the treatment, and long duration of treatment from 6 to 24 months is another challenges. But there are opportunities and initiatives also. The key strategies of TB control program are based on increasing case detection, improving treatment outcome while improving the use of existing tools and develop the new tools. Like Dr. James said, that there is a national strategic plan for eliminating TB. There is an aspiration, aggressive strategy for TB control, which is based on 4 pillars: detect, treat, prevent, and build capacities and policies. There are 8 thrust areas. And there are new initiatives coming in, which includes the renewed commitment, the social and behavioral change campaign, a scale-up of new diagnostics, active case finding, universal drug susceptibility testing offered to all TB patients, new drugs, new treatment regimens, shorter treatment regimens, patient support system to enable patient to complete the treatment, direct benefit of transfers to patient for nourishment support, to provider for notifying and also to the treatment supporter for enabling patient to complete treatment. Use of information communication technology for treatment adherence, private sector engagement for their resourcefulness as well as resources for TB care, and research for development and implementation of new tools. And here is what USAID India is also doing, supporting Government of India as well as catalyzing the private sector market. So set of activities which ultimately lead to increasing case detection and improving treatment outcome and supporting Government of India for championing a TB-free India. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagami. Dr. Kannan? So Dr. Kannan is a scientist at the National Institute for Research in TB in Chennai.
Good morning, one and all. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me as a panelist. I'm a veterinarian working in National Institute for Research in Tuberculosis here, even Tuberculosis Institute. 4 years back, my veterinary friends gave me DNA samples which is extracted from tissues from cattle, and we have done the spoliotyping the DNA we got it from veterinary college, and it was Mycobacterium tuberculosis that belongs to lineage 1. And similarly, we got samples from North India Institute also, and we have done the spoliotyping, and it is a North Indian prevalent spoliotypes we got it. So the bacteria is adapted to the animal. Mycobacterium tuberculosis strain is adapted to animal. So this was Robert Koch, who discovered that the Mycobacterium tuberculosis has done a classical experiment on cattle. He tried to infect the animal with Mycobacterium tuberculosis. After 8 months of infection, he done the postmortem examination, and none of the animals were found positive for, and he couldn't find any lesions from animal. So Mycobacterium organisms has this host specificity. Mycobacterium tuberculosis mainly infects human, but accidentally it is infect the animals also, but there will not be widespread infection, you cannot notice in animals. M. bovis has wide host range, but it infects animals and human. But in M. bovis infection in human, you can see extrapulmonary form, not a pulmonary or full-blown tuberculosis. So the previous data from India shows that there is a reverse zoonosis happening. A lot of people reported Mycobacterium tuberculosis isolated from cattle. So we have planned a study in Chennai to screen these animal handlers and animals. Briefly, we have screened the animals, 167 animals, and 21 were positive for CAD positive. And we have screened 271 animal handlers, and 50 were symptomatic, and 6 were culture positive. And we have done the polygotyping, which belongs to lineage 1, and one of the animal isolates were MDR TB, multi-drug resistant TB. And we have isolated MR, Mycobacterium this is another group of Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex organism. And we have done the whole genome sequencing of the isolates. We found that there is a transmission between the human to animal and animal to animal Mycobacterium tuberculosis transmission, this is not reported previously. Usually Mycobacterium tuberculosis cattle is a dead-end host for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So whenever we are talking about the stop TB, NTB, RSTB, we have to consider bovine TB, controlling the bovine TB also. Because if we are controlling human TB, we are focusing on human TB only. And on the other side, the animals are act as a reservoir host for Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and it is transmitted to the environment, and it may infect a human also. So whenever you are speaking about controlling the tuberculosis, you have to consider bovine TB control also. The major needs required in the areas of fundamental understanding of the ecology and transmission of disease become necessary and mandatory. Poorly quantified prevalence of Mycobacterium infection in Indian livestock. Existing data is a local snapshot. Poor communication between human and animal health branches. Now we have came together with veterinary colleges, and we are doing the animal handlers and animal screening. Like that, the branches between human and animal come together, and they have to exchange the data. The TB prevalence in captive animals and wildlife needs to be studied. This is also, we have received samples from deer and slot bear, which is positive for Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So this is also, we have to focus to screen the wildlife also. The entire animal population, the close vicinity of decubation needs to be screened for transmission. So the prevention of
Colonel, I think you're going to have to wrap up.
yeah. So the prevention of infection from bovine to human and vice versa, the properly trained manpower, public awareness programs are necessary, and the proper hygienic practices are required. So whenever the control of tuberculosis is it's possible only with the vaccine. So already DBT has funded the vaccine program in India. There is another pipeline vaccines are available for human tuberculosis. That is also tried in animals and for effective control of the tuberculosis. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Ben Gifford from the OHIC. He's in charge of the news at the Science and New Technologies Department.
Thank you for the opportunity to present some comments on this important topic from the perspectives of the OIE. My presentation is basically organized in looking at the needs and opportunities and different factors which I think we should need to consider in dealing with this problem. First off, need to raise awareness of the current scope and burden of bovine tuberculosis and zoonotic tuberculosis to highlight the importance of control and eradication programs. For example, this roadmap for zoonotic tuberculosis. So we need to conduct baseline epidemiologic studies to estimate the current socioeconomic burden of various forms of tuberculosis from an animal health and welfare, productivity perspective, as well as a public health perspective. And this baseline data will be useful for measuring the impact of control measures. So we need to communicate these findings to affected groups, including stakeholders and people who would be impacted by that. And I did bring a copy of this roadmap that people have been discussing, so if people are curious about, that's available free online, and also printed copies are available. Other needs, need diagnostic tests, people have discussed this. Veterinary services need access to validated diagnostic tests for surveillance and diagnosis, including sensitive and specific tests for individual animal diagnosis or herd surveillance. Relatively few validated tests are available currently, so there is need for additional tests to meet specific needs. Low-cost tests for laboratory surveillance, rapid tests, point-of-care tests, and DIVA tests to differentiate vaccinated animals from infected animals. Also need to focus on development of vaccines and validation and registration of those products. The registration process is key because there are some concerns about the efficacy of some of the vaccines that have been tried previously, so that will be important to establish international acceptance of the vaccines. So they will need to conform with international standards for purity, potency, safety, and efficacy, and be evaluated and approved by regulatory agencies. And the benefit would be to reduce dissemination of disease among cattle, but also to prevent contamination of food products and the environment. Also, we need to replace the current international standard bovine tuberculin. This is a project that I've been working on. The OIA maintains a standard for using calibrating bovine tuberculins. This is provided to national laboratories and manufacturers for use in establishing the uniformity of the tuberculin tests that are used for testing the cattle. So that's a test that was established in 1986. The reference at least was established in 1986 and has become depleted. Also need to explore innovative approaches to control bovine tuberculosis on premises in countries or regions where the disease is endemic, and progressively work toward elimination. The OHIC standards as outlined in the Terrestrial Animal Health Code and manual diagnostic tests and vaccines should be considered as a basis for the control of bovine tuberculosis. So these standards are updated as new information becomes available. And the bovine tuberculosis standard was last updated in 2009, so that's really overdue for an update, and we'll be looking at that to take into consideration any new information that becomes available, such as some of the information you might be hearing about today. And India's experience will be key. That's the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper, for doing this really fast. Next up is Dr. Jim Hewinson from Aberystwyth University. Dr. Glenn Hewinson was actually the chief scientist for TB control in the UK and ran the TB program in the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Vivek, and good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank the organisers. I'm honoured to speak at such an important event, and I hope this is the start of something meaningful for India. I've been set by the organisers a couple of exam questions that I'll cover on my next 3 slides. The first exam question was to identify my top 3 major needs and opportunities. And I think these are in line. I think you'll see that there's a constant theme between a number of the speakers, and these are certainly in line with what Glenn spoke about on the OIE presentation. And these are 3 of the 10 points that are highlighted in the roadmap for control of zoonotic TB that are highlighted in the WHO, FAO and OIE roadmap. My first, and I think James touched on this, is really to prevent infection through food and milk, through heat treatment of milk and the thorough cooking of food. As James said, the lessons that I've learned is that this will reduce the chance of transmission of M. bovis infection or other mycobacterial infections from cattle, especially in children. But of course, this doesn't stop infection of humans through other routes like intimate contact of people with their animals, in which case you have to remove that source of infection. So it won't stop contact, but it will have a very effective way of reducing infection in people. We saw that in the UK when we introduced pasteurisation. The second one, and I think this is the theme that people have been highlighting, is that we need to collect and report more complete and accurate data from human and animal populations to know what the issues are and where those issues are. So this identifies the scale of the problem, both from a disease burden perspective and also from an economic perspective, in which you can use that data for advocacy and to target your interventions in an appropriate manner. So once you've defined, you've got your data, you know where the problems are, and you can start to understand how you might put your interventions in most effectively. And the third area that I think there's an opportunity is to evaluate whether alternative tools to test and slaughter, which have been shown to be effective in a number of countries, but clearly are not feasible in others, to look whether these alternatives, control tools such as vaccination and DIVA testing, or test and segregation of infected animals, are effective for countries where the test and slaughter strategies just are not feasible to be implemented. And this will really evaluate whether such alternative interventions will have an effect and where they might have an effect most importantly. Some lessons on what things may not work, or things that might be done in a control strategy. Certainly you've heard the theme that intensification and animal movements are very important drivers of the spread of TB infection. I would advocate the use of highly sensitive tests and testing regimes, and potentially pre- and post-movement testing is highly recommended. You don't want to be moving infected animals if you can help it, and you need to get infected animals out of a herd if you know infection is there. The one issue that I would really flag up is if testing is done without any movement in controls in place, farmers may sell on their infected stock, thus increasing the spread of infection, the test and spread that Nathan talked about yesterday. And often they will move animals long distances, so they don't sell infected animals to their neighbours. They will sell infected cattle much distant to where their farms are. I think appropriate ownership of the problem is crucial, and we've learnt to our cost, I think, in the UK, that you need the people who have the problem to take control, and this is a multi-sectorial problem. And the other lesson that we've learnt is once infection spreads to wildlife, it is very difficult to control. So what are the three, how might we address these needs? The first need I've said is that you need to improve surveillance. What traps might this come with movement of test positive animals? The second issue is the opportunity is to evaluate vaccination and DIVA testing, and I'm delighted that this is going to be starting in India under Professor Kapoor's leadership. And my bottom line is that what you really need to do is to identify your transmission pathways and implement appropriate interventions. And to do that, you need some way of doing this effective surveillance.
Thank you, Dr. Houston. Next up is Dr. Byrigaga. He's the host of this conference and needs no introduction. He's from the IHVB.
Morning to everyone. So after knowing the magnitude of damage caused by this single infectious organism, and the experts world over and experts sitting on dais and who the panelists and keynote address presented. So there is need for taking some of the important measures as suggested by this thing, and now it is time to implement that, and with the help of architecture from Vivek Kapoor and funding from our DBT. So a Maidan network program has been initiated for the cause of this control of this TB. So briefly I will mention like what are the functions and what are the activities of this program. So this is a multi-institutional, multi-centric program architecture with the help of DBT, and we are the PMU product monitoring unit, and we have the centers across the globe, across the India with Tanwas, Luas and Anand, West Bengal and different places, so that having different objectives and different mandates for this program. So we all know that, I think with the previous discussions, we know that what is the need of this program to control of this tuberculosis. Like any disease control program, it requires a systematic surveillance, a fit for purpose diagnostic tool, which should be confirmatory, sensitive and specific, and also a suitable vaccine which can take care of this control of this particular disease. So now in tuberculosis, now we have the existing PPD and BCG in animals. There is a varied results which needs to be a systematic study how this BCG is useful in control of the disease in cattle, and also its role in control of transmission among the cattle and to the human beings. And when it comes to the diagnostic purpose, I think experts are of the opinion that the current PPD has to be improved and has to be, because that is designed way back in some decades earlier as per our Glenn Gifford. So it needs to be improved, which has to be given it's a more sensitive, more specific and confirmatory with more advantages. Once again, thanks to its social cause, PMGF has initiated the work of developing these synthetic peptides, which have got advantages over this PPD. Synthetic PPD cocktail has been designed with the knowledge of this genomics and proteomics, which is reactive to in TB animals. And the initial studies by using this PPDs, they are found to be useful tool in as a defined skin test. And the main advantages being it's more specific and more sensitive, similar to the, or maybe it's better than the OE approved PPD, and it's easy to standardize, unlike other PPDs where it requires some specific laboratory conditions and all, and no reaction in the vaccinated animals. So it has got the potential of DIVA advantage. And also a single PPD cocktail can be used and it can differentiate. Even there is no need for the use of avian PPD also in this. And this program, our Maidan program, so we mainly focus on evaluation of this synthetic peptides in diagnosis of BTB. And initially we are going to study the safety studies and the stability studies, and also to evaluate the usefulness of these peptide cocktails in diagnosis of both reactive and non-reactive animals, so it can establish its sensitivity and specificity. And this, after the laboratory trials, we are taking it to the large-scale field trials for the usefulness of these peptides. And next focus is on our BCG, so study of immune response. Now for the tuberculosis, as of now we don't have any other vaccine which is apart from this our human BCG. Same BCG we are going to study in non-reactive cows in BCG, and also in reactive animals, how it behaves, the BCG impact, whether the disease is limiting or transmission is limiting. Those studies we will be taking up. And to study the usefulness of peptides for DIVA study in laboratory as well as in the field studies. With this beginning, maybe we will take it further, like whatever the experts have suggested, a fit for purpose diagnostic tool, which is more sensitive, confirmatory and specific, advantages with the current PPD, and also usefulness of BCG vaccine in controlling bovine TB, which can limit the transmission among the cattle and to the human beings. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Dr. Bhairagava, and I really thank all of the speakers for keeping us on track. Next up is Dr. Jagjit Amtak, who is the General Manager of the Asia region for Thermo Fisher. Dr. James Young, who is listed in your program, was unable to come because of visa difficulties.
Very good morning to all delegates, and thanks to the organizing committee for giving us the opportunity to present, talk about One Health India from the industry point of view. Well, I am Jagjit. Thanks Dr. Kapoor for introducing me. I'm a general manager taking care of South Asia business for life science, the whole of stream. So I'll be talking at a very high level on the overview of offerings what we have from diagnostic technology platform. I've been hearing from yesterday very productive, constructive, collaborative discussions on One History and challenges associated with that. Diagnostics, especially sensitivity, specificity, false positive, false negative, and lack of awareness, vaccine challenges, capacity to scale up, and basically biohazards and biosafety, which is associated with that. So from industry point of view, we address all those issues, so we'll be talking on that. At Thermo Fisher Scientific, we are a world leader in serving science, basically enabling all our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer. So in India, we are present across the whole of India. We have more than 725 employees. We have 8 offices. We have 2 dedicated labs. So we have all the hands-on technology where we get the scientists together. We do a lot of workshops. We do a lot of symposiums where they feel the instruments and the technologies, and they see themselves the technology in front of them. When we talk about the One Health, we basically represent both the human and animal health, where we represent the technologies like serology, synthetic biology, cell biology, protein cell analysis, antibody and immuno, and molecular, which evolves on DNA, RNA technologies. Our focus is basically on bovine, swine, aquaculture, and poultry. The topic is tuberculosis, so I'll be restricting myself only on bovine tuberculosis. Just for information, swine flu, we are the only vendors who have H1N1 offerings to the country where it's being approved by WHO and CDC, and all the labs use our equipment and technology. The diagnostics is very simple. Basically, everybody knows about it, coming from the science background. So it's basically collecting a sample from animal, bird, environment, or maybe a postmortem, getting into diagnostics, and then finally into results. When we talk about diagnostics, it's basically culture, ELISA, qPCR, and NGS technologies, which is next generation sequencing. Talking about the overall TB, BTB concept, we have a different offerings to offer. One is the PCR, that is qPCR based. Then we have interferon gamma kits. Dr. James also spoke about in his presentation about Bovigam kits, which is being approved by OHIC, which belongs to Pyronics, which Thermo Fisher has taken. Then we have skin test offerings, which we have kits for that. The applications is again, which is very well known to, and the related issues, the opportunities in disease which comes along with that. This is just to give you an insight about how our test, talking about when we talk about one Bovigam kit, is much better as compared to skin test. The whole process takes only 7 days to detect tuberculosis as compared to the normal process of skin test, which will take almost 180 days. So these are the flows what we have for when we talk about the ELISA. So we have a complete setup. We can do a turnkey project with you. At all stages we have our platform where we talk about collecting of samples, preparing samples, adding reagents, incubating, washing, adding reagents, and analyzing the results finally. And these are all can be done at a very small scale, at a high scale depending upon the applications what we're working on. Then we have workflow into molecular diagnostics. Again, most of the institutes in India across the globe, we have presence there. We have the technologies where we have qPCRs, we have PCRs, we have extraction units, so virtually everything out there. And finally, in genomics, again, this basically evolves around sequencing, seq platforms, and NGS, where you have to go to copy level determination of genes. We have the technology for that as well. So we have our presence in all PSL3, PSL4 labs.
just to give you a kind of landscaping what we have customers across India. So in India, almost 40 to 50% of the labs we have present, and all the technologies, all the scientists, depending upon the kind of application what they do. Because when we talk about One Health, there's so much other things apart from only tuberculosis is a part of thing. And with this, again, just wanted to reiterate, we are serving our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jagjeet. And again, thank you so much to all the panelists for keeping us in time. Unfortunately, Dr. Solomon Gebre from NADIC, the National Animal Health Disease Investigation Center in Ethiopia, wasn't able to make it either because of visa issues. But so we have an extra few minutes to go on with our discussion, which is absolutely exceptional. We started a few minutes late, but now I think we can get back on track. So thank you to all of the panelists. Questions? We have the microphone. Yes. So we can start off with Dr. Gongol here. And then
I'm Gyanendra Gondal from WHO Regional Office for Southeast Asia. When we see National Tuberculosis Program, it is geared towards pulmonary tuberculosis. They do not consider bovine tuberculosis as it does not exist. It is happening because we cannot generate data and information on incidence of bovine tuberculosis, and the challenges for surveillance, it has been already highlighted. But in clinical practice, what is happening, when there is fever of unknown origin, all tests negative, including sputum and tuberculin tests, then they will try to suspect extrapulmonary tuberculosis. And even intestinal tuberculosis, they could diagnose through colonoscopy. The problem is that the TB medicine is available free of cost for those who have pulmonary tuberculosis, sputum test positive. But if patient has extrapulmonary tuberculosis and the doctor, particularly in South Asia region, they think our population is more prone to tuberculosis, and they have to they try to monitor drug response, dose response relationship. But these extrapulmonary tuberculosis patients, they have no access to free medicine. So that is my observation. Thank you.
Any comments on that, Dr. Alvadi or Dr. Ganguly?
Actually, this was one thing which I was trying to use in the summary, that when your 11th health ministers from Southeast Asian region signed for the tuberculosis and controllable tuberculosis by 2025 and later on maybe up to 2030, this factor was not a factor, because when I talked to Sarup Sarkar, who was the person at that time, he said that I'm keen to listen to this, and but we need to have a roadmap, and this was one of the very good platform to have that roadmap. Only few major roadblocks are there, that we need to decide on the diagnostics which will be used, which we need to understand the transmission little better, because Indians boil their pasteurized milk also, and Indian overcook their food, so the transmission dynamics is slightly different, and we don't understand it very well except the human-to-human contact. And you really got in a very important part that there has to be a change in policy, because at the moment our access to tuberculosis treatment is through pulmonary tuberculosis infections, and here there could be a pulmonary infection. So this needs a major change in policy at this given moment. And finally, there need to be somewhere a homogenization of the human and the animal program, and here also there has to be a policy. And what we got from the data, that it is not only the farm animals In India, the free-ranging animals are much more than the farm animals, and we cannot really account for all the cases from the farm animals alone. So it's a very peculiar situation in India, and we do not know any other reservoir. In India, the badger is in UK, but in India, we have human tuberculosis in monkeys who live in a very close conjunction with us. But we do not know of any other animal reservoir which could be intermediate and sustaining it when we do. So there are issues over here which are totally unresolved. They do not figure in the policy, and I don't think if we don't do that effectively through the UN system, through the Indian government systems and others, and this platform today, which was provided by Dr. S.R. Rao and other government secretaries here, this platform will be very useful to really flag this on and come to a doable policy, because at the end of the day, what we need is a doable policy.
Thank you.
So just one clarification here. This government TB control program provide care to the extrapulmonary cases, both diagnosis and treatment. But as I agree, there is no differentiation or no diagnosis to differentiate between the mycobacterium tuberculosis infection and the bolus infection. But the drugs and diagnostics are provided free as for pulmonary TB cases.
Thank you. Question here and then question there. You have your microphone. Go ahead.
My little concern is about
Can you just announce your name and institution?
Dr. Meenakshi. I am Vice Professor in Animal Biotechnology, RUAS, Hisar. My little concern is about the US zoonosis, very rightly pointed out by Dr. Kanan. This is not only a case of tuberculosis, but in other diseases also, there is a case of reverse zoonosis. I am working on rotaviruses. I have seen human rotavirus in wines, same is true for rhinoviruses and even cryptosporidium. So, do we go for checking, screening of the samples for reverse zoonosis? Should we have some guidelines? And what happens if it is in the wild animals? That is a big question, because reverse zoonosis is increasing day by day in tuberculosis also. So, can we have some different line of treatment for such cases, or we have to some guidelines? I want to know about that.
Kanan and then perhaps James.
I think that's a very important question. I think that it's something that we all struggle with, and we're all dealing with these different infections in our animals that are transmitting to us, and I don't think there's any magic solution. But I think that the area that I would focus on is trying to promote the idea of farming, selling safe food to the people, and I think try and ensure that farmers keep their animals healthy as best we can, which requires investment of veterinary resource in order to help them to do that. But I don't think that there are any easy solutions to that problem, which is a global one. It's not just here in India.
Any line of treatment, suggested line of treatment for these reverse zoonosis cases, or same line of treatment can be followed?
So just if I understand it right, reverse zoonotic would mean that MTB comes into a cow. In terms of treatment of the cattle, as I think James and others suggested, it's contraindicated for a variety of reasons. And so I think treating cows should not be our immediate focus. However, this is something that we are going to have to try and figure out to try and prevent at least the emergence of antimicrobial resistance. So the treatment of already infected cows is something that we need to try and figure out what to do, but there are no recommendations. And certainly treating with current antimicrobial regimes would be quite dangerous.
Because it is a long-term treatment, and it will be one of the disasters for the antimicrobial resistance spread in the human.
Good question, Anne.
My name is Jamie Thompson. I'm from the International Union Against TB and Lung Disease. So I think, first I'm attending this is a conference, and I'm from the animal health side, as we call it here, so thanks for having me to speak, Professor Kapoor. I think I got clear three messages. One is that we need to coordinate, collaborate. We've been hearing that from yesterday. The other message that I've heard today is really about without really addressing bovine TB, you cannot end TB or zoonotic TB. So it's in that vein that I want to reflect a little bit on India and what are the opportunities there, because I also heard yesterday that there is no resources in the vet sector. Where I think Professor Wood showed us the National Strategic Plan, which Umesh also referred to, very ambitious. Our Prime Minister of India has made a commitment that he wants to end TB in India 5 years before the SDG goals. So can we ride on that momentum? And the other aspect really is the National TB program in India is very robust, very, I think, well implemented public health program. In fact, it is often said that TB programs are very well designed and implemented. So how can we use that network? It's a pity that nobody from that program is in this conference. And I would really urge, when we move forward, that we talk to them at the policy level, implementation, engage with them, with the expertise, the funding, and the public health network. How can we expand what we need to do? With the understanding that we have to address bovine TB, without which we cannot end TB. And I think the third point that I want to make is this book that has been spoken about a lot in the conference. I too bought copies of it. I'll leave it in the reception and you can pick it up from there. We're very happy to be called publisher to this conference. And this really lays out a roadmap for zoonotic TB. And so I'm wondering whether this is something we can, at the policy level, as Dr. Ganguly said, have something like this for India that we can implement. And the last point really is, I think zoonotic TB, we need to have this discussion more in the human health side. The union also does a global conference every year, and I'm very happy to tell you that out of 5 tracks in that conference, 1 track is dedicated to zoonotic TB, and I know many people in this room are responsible for this. It's coming to India for the first time, the conference in Hyderabad in October, and we're looking forward to have more discussions on that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Tripathi.
Tuberculosis is very common in tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is also very common in wild animals in India, especially animals in captivity like deers, and they have got a quite different type of pathology also. So this will also be included in any control program.
So if I can just summarize your question, I think you said that there is a difference in pathology between livestock and wild animals, and we need to consider that. Question at the back there.
Myself, Dr. Praveen Goyal, Director Research at OHIC. The question and the suggestion is, in addition to doing the diagnostic, we should put a lot of more efforts for the therapeutic, that is non-antibiotic-based therapeutic. I am a large animal clinician in addition to researcher as well. Because antibiotic-based therapy is not neither workable any longer. Cytokines and monoclonal and some Ayurveda, there are a lot of things which we should put funding for them, and the centers will be developed.
Thank you. So your point is that we need to consider alternatives for animals that are
in a large way.
Certainly understood. Does anyone want to comment on are they aware of any of these alternatives that might be used? Because the concern really has been, and I'm personally aware of individuals within India who are using monoisoniazid therapy in cattle, in livestock. It's an extraordinarily dangerous situation. And these are individuals who are, of course, clinically trained, both in human as well as in animal medicine, veterinary medicine. The consequences to India's TB control and to global AMR emergence is absolutely astounding. And it gives me great pause when individuals who recognize that their cattle are infected will go ahead and treat them with monodrug therapy, which has been shown more than 60 years ago to be extraordinarily dangerous. But what happens is you get a short-term increase in milk productivity, and so the farmer becomes very happy. The veterinarian gets paid extra money. Those animals then stay well for a little while, but they're spreading the infection to all of the time elsewhere. And so this is the issue that we're going to have to deal with. So this is a real problem that I think we have to come up with a solution for. So we have time for 2 more quick questions. Sorry, Dr. Ganguly. So there's a question there first, and then we can complete. Sorry.
Yeah.
ladies first.
My name is Joseph Masam from Tanzania. Thanks to DITRA for inviting me to attend this product conference. My question is directed to Dr. Green, G40 from OHIC. I want to know if OHIC have reports of some countries already using CBG vaccine in cattle. And what is the directive of OHIC to member states with regard to the use of CBG vaccine in cattle? Thank you.
We're aware that BCG vaccine is being investigated as an alternative for use in cattle. I'm not aware of countries where it's actually registered. I mentioned the OA terrestrial manual, the manual of diagnostics, tests, and vaccines for terrestrial animals, which currently mentions the possibility of using BCG vaccine, but discourages it because of the lack of efficacy data that was available at the time that the chapter was written in 2009, and also the potential interference with diagnostic testing. So I mentioned though that these chapters are updated as new information becomes available. So if there are sort of second generation BCG vaccines or different alternative regimens that are developed, that could be something that would be considered. And the process for amending those chapters is we have a group of experts, including one of the experts is Dr. Hewenson, joining me on the table here, who review the information and provide recommendations. And there is a process for internal peer review of any proposed amendments to those guidance documents. And it actually includes full circulation for comments to all the 182 member countries. So it's not something that we do based on speculation, but if there is convincing data to support the use of those products, it would be the chapter could be amended, but it's up to each country to decide within their own regulatory system which products are used. The OA is we're not a regulatory agency. We provide guidance, technical references for veterinary services to use, and intended to have a science-based regulatory process for all the diseases that we regulate. Cover.
Thanks, Glenn. Lynn?
Yes. I am aware that there is limited use of BCG in New Zealand in areas where they can't control the TB in wildlife and possums. But those animals are not traded. That was for internal use within the country, and it is limited to targeted areas. I think that links in with what I was saying about understanding the epidemiological situation before you apply your interventions.
Research base has shown, so the studies that are currently going on, fairly extensive ones. In Chile, there's a study that actually Drs. Wood and Newton are leading in Ethiopia, and there's a trial coming on right now in India as well. And so there's been a really nice review that's come out on the efficacy of BCG vaccination recently, and I'm happy in cattle, and I'm happy to share that with you as well. Dr. Kamlu?
Actually, the BCG studies in humans showed that with a long-term study, it showed that it works in children and infants. It doesn't work in the adult population because of the high burden of the disease over there and reactivation which occurs from time to time. So it was very difficult study, but a classic study. What we expect that from this BCG studies which Vivek has just identified, that we ultimately create an algorithm of a target population in the cattle which should be targeted, because for any vaccination it cannot be the entire population. It doesn't happen like that. So it could be younger cattle who could be ultimately done, but these are some of the major demonstration projects which will make the policy makers to take a decision. And the new generation with the BCG handle, with the new generation of antigens are coming up, we might get something better in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Kumbali. Dr. Shom, quick question. We're right out of time.
Just I would like to put this information. Department of Animal Husbandry, Dairy and Fisheries, Government of India has made 5 diseases compulsory to be screened in bull stations. One is tuberculosis, paratuberculosis, IBR, brucellosis and trichomoniasis. So we have some serological tests for IBR and brucellosis, and the people in the states are desperately requiring tests for TB and para-TB, that is PPDs. PPDs are inadequate in the country, so I think it should be made available quality PPD, number 1. Number 2 is para-TB is also a zoonotic disease, so recently emerging zoonotic disease, so it should be figured in One Health. The problems of diagnosis of para-TB, transmission from animals to humans, and then the treatment for humans in case of infected para-TB. So this I felt important to sensitize at this platform. Thank you.
One of the para-TB vaccines, the John's Bacillus vaccine, is now being manufactured in India, in Bangalore. This was supported by the Indemnity program and is now available. And the diagnostic test is also available for the same. So for the John's Bacillus, it is available.
Well, thank you. So please, thanks to all of the speakers. Would you join me in thanking all of the speakers? So we're going to have a break for 15 minutes and then so my apologies. Very bad moderation.
I have been speaking all throughout, so there were few things which I understood in today's panel discussion and made the speech, the keynote speech, that the surveillance and the quality of surveillance will be a very important part in the whole system. And we need to develop perhaps a better surveillance tools, and giving up the surveillance will lead into disaster, which was shown in the Britain, and we have seen in 2 other diseases in India. And when it comes back with a vengeance. It doesn't go down easily after that. So the surveillance, what I understand, is the key there, and the ownership of the surveillance of both animal health and human health, and joining them together to make out a meaning of that will be very, very important. In Indian context, in Indian culture, it is also very important to understand a little bit of the transmission dynamics, because if we understand that, it will be easier for us to create additional interventions in this area. Then it will not be possible using any tools if the communities don't participate. And if they go on using INH monotherapy because they see economic advantage to that, they are not going to participate. So we have to give to communities something in which they understand that it is to their economic benefit for them to participate. And here we need to bring in people who are not sitting in this audience today. These are the NGOs, these are the social and behavioral people who go out to the communities, spread simple messages so that they participate. This is what I understood in today's one of the comments which were made by Vivek, that this is necessary. We have a problem in this, and we need to resolve that when we vaccinate and when we mass vaccinate, we will have a problem with the diagnosis. So we need, there are some peptides which have been used in this new skin test. We need to see that whether we could design something which will ultimately identify tuberculosis even in the vaccinated population. So this was something which came out very loud and clear. Something came out very loud and clear that at this given moment treatment is not an option. In India, culling is also not an option. So we need to get appropriate isolation facilities which are there for humans, for cattle, whatever it costs, because if we crowd them together in a crowding system, we create a lot of problems for us. So here we need technology, here we need affordable technology. This should actually be associated with vaccine because there is a very special situation over here which is not existing in other parts of the world. Finally, one of the things which comes out that we need to use major public health tools to understand that how that are there some strains, because the strains are being sequenced now, and the sequence tells a lot of information, particularly the cross infection between the cattle and humans. And we do not know about monkeys. Monkeys are infected heavily with tuberculosis in India. We need to use this information and a strong bioinformatic information to identify this kind of a transmission and whether they are moving from region to region. Like in India, Beijing strain, which was not that prevalent, now in the urban settings is up to 12% of the total infections. So these will be some of the very interesting things to study. And I also acknowledge one of the heroes today of this audience, which is Padma. She made it possible for us to keep on time. Again,
thank you. Thank you, Ganguly sir, for your crisp and apt introductory and concluding remarks. And thank you, Vivek, for conducting this excellent program very nicely. And thank you for all the panelists. As a gratitude of respect, we will give some small mementos to take you to the
Thank you.